Hello, and welcome to Trauma Rewired, the podcast that teaches you about your nervous system, how trauma lives in the body, and what you can do to heal. I'm your co host, Jennifer Wallace. I'm an NSI educator, and I bridge the medicines of your nervous system into psychedelic healing spaces.
And I'm Elizabeth Kristoff, founder of brainbase.com, a virtual community where we work on training the nervous system for resilience and behavior change. Jennifer and I have been recently expanding our own visibility. We've been doing some live chats on Instagram, and we would love for you all to join us there. You can follow us at trauma.rewired.
We hope you enjoy this conversation.
We are so excited today to have Lindsey Wall with us. She's a neurosomatic intelligence practitioner, a movement practitioner, and she's actually one of our Rewire coaches on brainbase.com. And she specializes in working with neurodivergent folks, pain, and hypermobility. So we're actually going to dive into all of those things today. We got a lot of really interesting topics to cover, a lot of ground to explore. So welcome, Lindsey. We're so excited to have you here.
Thank you all so much. It's really such an honor and privilege, and I'm super excited to be here.
I'm so excited for you to be here too. We have an interesting kind of parallel journey on the path. Just a little bit of personal history. Lindsey and I have known each other for a few years, which also comes through a past life with Elizabeth. And then here we are to find ourselves in as facilitators at Brain Based Wellness together now. And as a reflection, your nervous system that I was around several years ago versus the nervous system that I experience now is really different. And I see you showing up quite differently in a new place of comfort and self-compassion, and in a way of like full self-expression of really coming into yourself. And that has been a really beautiful journey to witness. And I just wanted to reflect that to you.
Thank you. Thank you. I feel it in my own body and the way my life has changed. There's still lots on the journey, but yeah.
We're all on the journey, and it is really neat to be here with the two of you because we all did start together in a movement background with my movement studios, and probably we're all a lot more dysregulated at that time in our life. I certainly know I was deep in some workaholism and a lot of unprocessed stuff, and it's really such a blessing to be on this journey together and get to move through in all this work in community with one another. I know a lot of what brought you into the neuro world was your own experience with pain and hypermobility, right? Like we often find ourselves going deeper into our healing journey because of the outputs that we're experiencing in our nervous system. For me, it was a lot of addiction and binging. And Jennifer and I talk a lot about that, how binging was like our portal into this deeper level of knowing ourselves and our nervous system. And I'd love for you to talk a little bit about your journey with your pain, with hypermobility, and how that was a catalyst into the work that you do now.
Yeah. It was probably around like 2016 when I found you, and Jennifer was there too. And I was definitely in this burnout workaholism stage in my life too. But as far as what really brought me in was the pain and some of the issues I was having. And truthfully, migraine started for me at like age of 6. So pain was something I've lived with most of my life, like severe pain off and on. But by the time I hit 30, my body was just completely and utterly giving out on me. I ended up being hospitalized with intestinal pain, some gastro issues. I was having a lot of arthritic pain. I mean, just to sleep at night, I was popping for Advil at night just to get through the pain and to go to sleep. My joints were giving out left and right. Sleeping on my side, I'd wake up with a subluxated shoulder all the time. It was like a regular thing. And at the time, I think I had a really bad knee sprain. I was afraid to go into the doctor and hear the worst. So I was looking for ways to kind of fix what was going on in my body. Around that same time, a little bit before, I found out I had Ehlers-Danlos, which is a degenerative joint or sort of connective tissue disease, lots of hypermobility. And so my joints were literally wearing out faster than others. So I came in originally to a movement practice of Pilates to help me focus on the Ehlers-Danlos, to help me focus on strengthening my joints in the hope that maybe that arthritis would get a little bit better. And that's where things really started. There was that breathing, the movement, and it was definitely helping regulate my nervous system without me even realizing it. But I started training my nervous system with you, Elizabeth, not long after that. And that's where things really started to change for me. Um, so I was no longer, subluxating my shoulder, my joints were strengthening, and I was building more structural safety in my joints. But when we started training the nervous system, we originally kind of started more joint focused, a lot of vestibular training, proprioceptive system training. And for me, it was also a lot of interoceptive because I was very hyper aware of like when is a joint hyper and hypomobile because of the Ehlers-Danlos, and where's that point where like I'm going to push my nervous system into too much by going into that hypermobility. And so I was super aware of like how each joint was moving, when it was safe, when it wasn't safe. And so a lot of that nervous system originally was around the joints, and we were starting to build safety now, not only in the structure, but also in the nervous system. And it was great. And yeah, there was some definite reduction in my arthritis. But I think 3 months into this, and I realized I haven't had a migraine. And that was like this whoa moment for me. Because migraines were like every other week, once a month, sometimes even twice a week. They were a regular common thing. And here I was 3 months into this nervous system training and no migraine. So that was that like I'm on board moment.
It's really incredible when we get these super tangible outputs of and really measurable ways of seeing like, oh man, I'm working with my nervous system and it's making a real concrete difference in my life in something that is it's such a big deal. Living with chronic pain, having regular migraines, that has such a huge impact on quality of life. And then it's almost like when we start this work and we start to experience the relief in that, it's like, why, how come I didn't know about this? And it's the same with like the complex trauma underneath there. How come I didn't know that this is what's going on in my nervous system, in my body? And I think after we began that initial neurotraining, you and I worked together a lot privately in the Rewire container. And there was like the whole other component of pain, which is that emotional component underneath. And there was a big next step in your journey in our work together was the somatic emotional expression. And I'd love for you to just share a little bit about that if you're comfortable talking about that, because it is the two, there's the nervous system regulation part and the neurotraining, and then there's also the emotional component to these outputs.
Yeah. Well, like you said, there was a lot of stuff going on between this years of working with you and Rewire coaching, just to build safety in my body. For me, lots of inhibition drills were needed to build that safety. Um, Definitely kind of after NSI, I understand why that is now, and we might get into some of that later. Um, but the migraines were very small. They were kind of enclosed. They were in a container. The pain lasted for this amount of time and then it was over. But with that degeneration, with the Ehlers-Danlos, my thoracic spine has some biomechanical issues. So I was at the time holding a lot of pain there. And this was daily, regular, chronic pain. Pain management is why I was doing a lot of the neuro work. But when we started to get into that somatic processing of emotions, there was a moment that definitely made everything really change for me. Um, I didn't really understand or see the emotional side and component of pain until we were really deep into the work of the Rewire coaching. And being able to have you there and guide me through that processing was really transformative. I started to see and understand a little bit more of this loop of pain. Um, as it was something that was so ingrained in my life, it's my well-worn path. When my nervous system goes haywire, it goes to pain. It goes to severe headaches, migraines, it goes to my thoracic spine. And so starting to see this loop of all the fear and the anger and just the grief and frustration and hopelessness of like, this is how my life is. I am never going to be able to this pain. It's structural. It's not going away. Um, and this is it. And it's so disheartening. And those emotions circle right back and build into the pain. And so the thoracic spine, kind of the space your ribs are connected to, right between your shoulder blades, it's your heart space too, right? And so in my heart space, I am just holding all this pain, all this grief and anger. And there was one session in particular. You guided me through an EFT tapping around the fear, around the anger of the pain in that thoracic spine between my shoulders and my heart space. And on a daily basis, I was usually anywhere from like a 7 to a 9 out of 10 in pain. That was like my daily chronic living. And I'm sitting going through this EFT tapping with you. I'm screaming, I'm yelling, I'm crying. And it's just like oozing out of me like this black blob. And by the time we were done with that EFT tapping, there was no pain. I mean, it was gone completely. And that was, I don't know, maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago. And that's pretty much what I live in most days now. 0 to, maybe a bad day is like a level 2 out of 10 in the pain level. And this was coming from an 8 every single day. So it's just incredibly transformative and powerful to have that freedom and joy, relief, the energy that comes back when you're not living with pain. It's amazing.
That's remarkable. I mean, it is really amazing. Can you speak to a little bit of that? Because there's like a boundary, right? We can go into emotional work and hit this place where it's like, oh no, I'm not going there. I am not safe to go there. That is not okay. I would love to just sit in this moment for a minute and explore that sort of boundary and you being able to go into that place of that big release and cross the threshold in that moment that can be really scary once we get into that place. I don't know what your experience was like growing up, if you were taught to repress emotions from a very young age, or what your emotional experience was like. Maybe if you feel called to share that in the service of thinking of that boundary, that threshold.
Um, Emotions and expressing emotions are really challenging for me in multiple ways. It's not just boundaries for me. This does play into some of my neurodivergence, processing, explaining, expressing, understanding emotions. Um, Emotions can be very, very intense. And giving you a really good example, love. When I want to express like real excitement, real intense love and joy, which it usually is very intense for me, there's this like overexcitability and it's like an explosion. I can't really contain it. And because of that, as a kid, even throughout my life, even as an adult, it's sometimes hard to regulate and contain that. And I would hurt people. So my love looked very violent from other people's perspective. I would hurt my sister all the time. I'd get in trouble for it. And this was all coming from a place of love. Like I was happy, I was excited. And then I got in trouble. So from an early age, I learned to keep a lot of my emotions in, to regulate them to the best of my ability. And there was already this sort of innate wanting to do that anyways, because verbally I couldn't explain emotions very well. I couldn't, and I still struggle with that. And expressing emotions in a way that you or another person would understand is extra hard for me and the way my brain works and processes. So it just made sense to like, I'm just going to keep it in. I'm just going to hold it in. It's safer. It's less complicated. It's easier. It's less energy. It's going to just stay in me. It's just going to stay here. I'll process it the best I can. Sometimes just ignore it, disassociate from it. Um, Especially anger, especially fear. Those were really new ones for me to bring out and express. Um, yeah.
Yeah. I relate to that so much, like always feeling as a kid like I had these big emotions and they were scary for me. They were also maybe scary for other people. And and then the consequences of that, right? Learning to hold all of that in, and then it gets internalized in the body and we experience these outputs of dysregulation and pain from all that our body is doing to hold that in. And I kind of like to just jump into a little bit about neurodiversity while we're here. And then, I want to talk about your experience with NSI and all of that. But as we're talking about this, I thought, let's get into it. It's coming up, right? Um, and there was actually a little excerpt that I wanted to read because I was reading recently the book Divergent Mind by Janera Nuremberg. And there was just this one little part that really stood out to me in that it's so related to NSI. And she says that it is said that sense can be the gateway to the soul. I take that quite literally. Sight, sound, taste, touch, smell correspond either to our mental health or mental distress, depending on our sensitivities. At the core of our being are our genes, biology, and childhood experiences, but also our sensory makeup. That is how our nervous system responds to and interacts with our sensory world, what delights us and what repels us. Over time throughout our lives, these components interact, producing layers of emotions and resulting behaviors. When some of us end up in therapists or doctors' offices with anxiety, depression, or autoimmune challenges, our options are limited to talk therapy or medication because only the outer layers of emotion and behavior are probed. We've been going about our lives thinking we know the full list of diagnostic criteria, but the senses have been left out. Thus, the very core component of what makes people who they are goes completely untended. And I feel like that is so at the heart of what we're looking at with NSI and training the sensory input systems so that we can have new experiences and be more self-expressed. And it's just such a important foundational part of mental health and safety in the world.
Yeah. I think senses are, and the way we process sensory information is a big component of what make neurodivergent people brains so complex. Um, so yeah, sensory work is definitely a huge topic and interest for me.
It's really fascinating. I mean, neurodiversity, neurodivergence is such a broad term to use, right? And it's like saying in this one thing that I read, like fingerprints, no two persons' brains are alike. And we kind of know that through NSI. And what I also find interesting that it's a word that Elizabeth and I are trying not to use anymore, and it comes from modern medicine, and it's the word normal. Right. The word normal is in its own oppressive paradigm. Like, normal to what? We're all running around here, little traumatized babies out in the world. Everyone mostly has complex trauma. Like, what is normal? My brain's already affected by complex trauma. There are some things about neurodiversity that I relate to, that I'm trying to explore with the way that my brain plays music constantly. Or if I'm in an emotional flashback, I could find myself singing old school nursery songs, and like songs will come from nowhere and they seem to be related somehow to an experience that's happening in my body. It's called echolalia, and I don't know, they say that that's on like the autism ADHD spectrum. So I'm not really sure where that falls, but um I did just want to say that about the word normal being so dangerous for us as we do explore these more nuanced areas of our brains not being the same. And Elizabeth, I just loved what you've read so much, because you know me from even being in my space. Like, my space has to be colorful. There's wallpaper. I need a full sensory experience. Even in my home, there's smells going all the time, crystals and rainbows. And it's like, I need to live a full sensory experience. And then training that intentionally has really helped my focus. It's really elevated my capacity to learn and stay present in educational space. And I guess I'm just curious about your definition of neurodivergence, and like how you're feeling about that broad spectrum and what all of that encompasses on on a more institutional organizational type of level.
And truthfully, I'm learning to redefine and define some of this for myself as well. I'm 40 years old, and since I was about five, knew I had some, differences in my structural brain. Um, but I'm just now to explore this at the age of 40. So I am severely dyslexic, and I have recently started to identify on the autism spectrum as well. Um, there's a lot of shame with those labels for me. I was diagnosed when I was for severe dyslexia in kindergarten at the age of five. In college, told through a research group that I was on the spectrum. Um, Definitely did not want to go there or think about it. I was like, I got dyslexia. That's enough for me. I'm just who I am. And that's how I approached a lot of it for almost all my life. Well, this is how I am. Um, and it carried a lot of shame for me. And only recently do I feel like I can express this with some duality of compassion. There's still that shame there, but like I am starting to feel more curiosity about it, more compassion for it. And, there's a part of me that's like proud to say, hey, I'm dyslexic and I'm autistic. Um, and the way I really like to approach this is not through those labels, but rather this idea of like we all have lived these complex lived experiences. And by putting a label on it, we can sort of lessen or limit somebody's lived experience. So kind of viewing it through this lens of lived experience, and also the idea of neurodiversity where n equals one. And that's an important concept in NSI too, right? We all have these unique nervous systems. We all have individual differences in our brain. And for neurodivergent folks, our brains are structurally wired from when we were born in such a way that our intelligences vary so differently that we're outside of the bell curve. And I don't know if you're familiar with that term or that visual, that image, but if you imagine like a bell shape sitting on the ground, that big bulbous part of the bell that's where most brains and the way they work and the way they process things are going to fit within that big bulbous part of the bell. But as it fans out and starts to get narrower, there starts to become more minorities in the way their brains work. Um, and then there's even a lot of us that are outside of that bell curve altogether. Um, and it's outside of that box, outside of that systemic neurotypical world. And that's kind of how I like to kind of think of it and approach it as, for example, I've taken many tests to prove that I'm dyslexic to get 504 accommodations throughout my entire life. Yes, I have trauma around testing. Um, but I took an IQ test, came out in 120, 91 percentile, well above average. You know, neurodivergent folks are not intelligent. We just have a different way of processing things. And so if you look and go deeper into that IQ test, you look at my processing speeds and how my brain processes things, and I'm at 8 percentile. That is way, 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 way below average. You look at my perceptual organizational intelligence and index, and that's at the 97th percentile, way above average. So we have these very genius level in some areas in our intelligences and real big deficits in other areas. And for me, it's like processing speed and how I process things. Like it has to take a much different route through my head. I don't have necessarily the right neurotransmitters. I also like to think of my prefrontal cortex like a filter. And so, you know, a lot of neurodivergents are like, oh, there's structural differences in our prefrontal cortexes. For me, it feels like I'm more permeable to a lot of senses. I'll take in a lot more, but that filtration system really struggles to process it sometimes. Doesn't know how to necessarily organize what is important and what isn't. It gets stuck on a detail on the ground, and I want to feel that, or tactile touch that thing, or it doesn't always see these bigger pictures. It sometimes gets stuck into those details, and like I'm doing right now, kind of rambling into those details. But I just want to jump back to that IQ test. That's like your standard IQ test that I did. But at the same time, the facilitator gave me a non-verbal, language-free IQ test. And I was at 140, which is 99 percentile, compared to that lower score on the regular IQ test. I am naturally not a language verbal person. I am a non-verbal person. But because the way society and the system works, I have to communicate, right? To connect. I have to find some way and means, and I was able to. And you can see that in my lived experience.
Our next partner is AG1, the daily foundational nutritional supplement that supports whole body health. I drink it every morning. I gave AG1 a try because I'd heard about it on other podcasts that I really trust. And I love drinking a supplement that covers all my nutritional bases. It gives me an instant boost while supporting my entire body. I drink AG1 while I'm getting morning sun and doing my NSI drills, and it's an important part of my daily morning ritual. I find it a beautiful pairing to support my nervous system along with my drills. So if you want to take ownership over your health, it starts with AG1. Try AG1 and get a free 1-year supply of vitamin D and 5 free AG1 travel packs with your first purchase. Go to drinkag1.com/rewired. That's drinkag1.com/rewired. Check it out. The link is in the show notes.
I love exploring all of this so much, and especially this idea that there are so many different forms of intelligence and ways to self-express, and that when we're talking about nervous system training and nervous system regulation, I just always kind of want to come back to this idea for people too, that we're not trying to regulate ourselves into a world that doesn't fit us so that we can mask ourselves better or, suppress our natural gifts, but that we're working with the nervous system to make it feel safer inside, to be regulated, to explore who we really are, and to start to question some of these structures in society that are limiting for the person that we really are. Um, Sonia Renee Taylor has a great quote about body diversity. And she talks about how, like, in nature, it is very normal and celebrated to have diversity. And that in our society, we put a lot of limitations on that. Human bodily diversity is a form of natural intelligence. It means that our bodies are supposed to be different because that is the version that is specific to your particular journey. And that in order to have like a thriving world, a thriving ecosystem, we need diversity. And that same concept can be applied to neurodiversity, right? It's great that there's all these different ways that consciousness and intelligence and the human experience shows up, but we're operating in a system that isn't fit for all of this. And so the neuro work is not about trying to fit more into the system, but being able to work with our nervous system to feel safe in full self-expression. Would you agree with that, Lindsey? What's your take?
I would absolutely agree with that. And something I feel like I've started to notice as I explored my own aspects of autism is a lot of this NSI work has brought some of my own innate intelligences out. And I feel like some neurodivergent people already have a lot of our tools built in for our nervous system, but there's this sort of shame around them, like somebody's stimming in a social environment. Um,
What is
back up
stimming
there,
really quick
kind
for
of.
someone?
So stimming is basically sensory stimulation. It is adding a sensory element, whether it's to keep you present, to keep you in your own body, to help you process and deal with the surroundings and the environments and the inputs that are coming in. Or maybe it's to help you sort of process the emotions and move them through you. Um, it's something I now do on a regular basis. And like, I love going out and being in social environments. I'm a dancer. I like to go out partner dancing. But yeah, I've been made fun of at times for like, I'll bring my knitting with me because it's something for me to stay present in my own body, moving my hands, filling the yarn, filling the fabric. Or I will be like bouncing up and down on my heels while I watch everyone dance, or I'll be swaying to the music. For me, like having that music component, it really does help me also stay in my body when I am in social settings. So yeah, stimming is adding some sort of sensory element um, to your nervous system.
I have a client who I work with who also falls on the autism spectrum, and it's so interesting to hear you talk about music. Music is a big component of the training that we do together, finding drills for her in different times where she can incorporate music, incorporate, any of the sensory. I always, can we find a beautiful window? Like, what can you look at? She's also an artist, so trying to bring in the NSI into her art, into creativity has been so expansive. And then also habit stacking. Habit stacking was a really important tool or a really different way to approach things. Have you found that in your own journey, like finding just nuanced ways to work with the tools?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that because as a neurodivergent who has that slower processing, like I know things take me a whole lot longer. Like my drills that I do, I would love to sit down and do like a 30-minute drill session, but I will get lost. And that time, like I've made a lot of progress in my sort of time management, but a lot of neurodivergent folks don't really have this sense of time. And so stacking our drills, stacking our habits, so that like I'll put drills in my other habits. So when I brush my teeth, I do 2 or 3 drills throughout that. When I wake up and drink my water and look outside at the sun, I put 2 or 3 drills with that. So habit stacking is incredibly important for me to help me kind of maintain a flow without getting lost, if that makes sense.
It makes perfect sense. And it's so valuable, Lindsey. I feel like there's never any substitute for lived experience when we're working with people as coaches, as neurocoaches, you know, having the experience of complex trauma, having the experience of um, having a neurodivergent identity, and understanding at this different level how to work with someone who shares these same experiences, same patterns in the nervous system. And I feel so lucky that we have you at Brain Based as a coach so that you can offer all of your experience and these tools in a customized way for different people who resonate deeply with your experience. And I'm so glad that you came into NSI and took that journey. And I'd love to hear just a little bit about like how did you decide that it was time to do NSI? What was that experience like for you?
I definitely had these preconceived thoughts of like, I want to take us an NSI. I want to, be able to better serve my clients, help them work out of pain and fatigue. And I still do. That's still really important to me. But as I was coming into NSI and as I was really making that decision, there was this feeling of stuckness. And and what I mean by that is I feel like in this sort of healing journey that I've had, I've come to see it a lot like a spiral. And we're always sort of circling back into, traumas or beliefs, areas of ourselves that we want to maybe unfold deeper. And there's always this area of shame, worthiness, self expression, and visibility that I always get stuck at. And like I feel more aware and present with them now. And maybe I have some more compassion for them, but they are still real big roadblocks for me. And so coming into NSI, I kind of had that going on. And as we were diving into NSI, some of that started to unfold as we were taking these deep dives into the neurology, how the brain works with the nervous system. And it really started to pique my curiosity, um, and how that relates to neurodivergence and how neurodivergence and the nervous system and how they kind of relate, how neurodivergence and CPTSD have very similar outputs and responses. And started to ask and get really curious about like where is this line between what is a trauma output from a CPTSD, complex trauma, developmental trauma, or what is just like this is a natural deficit, or even this is a natural intelligence for me. And so that was definitely something that really started to pique my interest as I got into NSI.
And I would love to, if you don't mind, could you unpack that a little bit? Like, what is that line? I'm curious about that as I listen to you talk. And as, like I said earlier, I mean, we've explored complex trauma and the developmental brain. And that came from me sending an email to Matt and Elizabeth, like, I have brain damage. Complex trauma is brain damage. So, like, where is that line? Where?
So I don't know that I can tell you where that line is, truthfully. I can explain some of it that I'm exploring within my own sense and my own body. But I think that line, blurs a lot of the time. And like you said, complex developmental trauma, it is brain damage. Is it another form of neurodivergence? You know, that's a
I think
question.
it, I
Exactly.
really do. I
So,
really do. And I hate to use the word
yeah,
brain damage. I'm sorry for saying that. I might not use those words today,
yeah,
so I don't want to offend any of our listeners out there, but I used that word prior.
yeah. Structurally, the brain has changed. So what that can kind of look like for me, y'all had a great podcast about social anxiety and how it relates to complex trauma. Um, and I've started to be like, I've always identified like, yeah, I have social anxiety. But I've started to wonder like, where is that line for me? Um, is this really anxiety, or am I making this informed choice to go out and be social and put myself in what feels to me as an uncomfortable position? It's not that it feels unsafe. It's not that I feel peer pressure. I don't like drinking. I have no sense of peer pressure to drink. I have no sense of peer pressure to talk. I could stand in a corner and be perfectly happy and content. But at the same time, there are these social norms of like, okay, I should I make an effort? Should I go talk to people? Small talk I hate, but if you get me on a topic I'm super interested in, I won't stop talking. So what is social anxiety, and what is like, I'm just gonna ride out these sort of uncomfortableness, and I've got my tools. I'm sitting in the corner bouncing and just like absorbing all the cool things, the music, the sounds, the visuals, the people moving, feeling the textures of people's clothes in my brain. And I'm happy there and I'm fine. But people will look at me and be like, that weirdo, how awkward is she? Um, I'm starting to play and trying to figure out where that line is with me. Yeah, there are times where I do get anxious, and I have tools to also now rely on too. So it does kind of keep me in a little bit safer place, even if I am feeling uncomfortable. Disassociation is another one that I'm really like, I know I have this avoidant disassociative tendency. However, it's like my imagination is also one of my intelligences. Like, am I going to this happy place? Then am I going into my imagination daydream space for reasons of like, this is a trauma output? Or is this just like, I'm happy here and I want to be here? And I want to explore things up in my imagination. I want to explore spaces and how things feel. So I don't know where that line is. I am trying to learn it and find it within myself. And yeah.
This is so fascinating to me thinking about all of this, and because I have so many thoughts here. One, there is so much overlap between complex trauma and neurodivergence. And I think there's a whole level of trauma that comes in too during development when you are neurodivergent and you're trying to fit into a society
Mhm.
that doesn't fit with that. So there's like another layer of trauma there that
Huge.
could also be developmental trauma. And then I've been reading more about neurodivergence and trying to get ready. Next season, Jennifer and I are planning to go much deeper into mental health and mental health outcomes and all of this from an NSI perspective. And as I'm reading this stuff, I'm like, "Yeah, that's definitely me." Like there's a lot of this stuff, the big emotional responses, the like you were talking about, the social anxiety, the overwhelm, the sensory overload, the dissociation, and that also, fits with my trauma history and also maybe a part of who I am. And regardless of how my brain got to be this way, my brain is this way, right? Like maybe some of it is things that I was born with. Some of it comes from the changes that occurred because of my environment and the stressors that I was under growing up. And now my brain functions in a different way. And some of the times those are assets like you were talking about. And we talk a lot in here about how trauma is not always all bad, right? Like it gives us a much deeper level of understanding the human condition. It can lead to unfolding of a lot of leaps in consciousness as we go on this path to understand and unravel our trauma. And a lot of the ways that I've been shaped are also what make me a successful practitioner, um, an educator that birthed this podcast. And so it's just really interesting to explore that these things are both assets and things that we want to also work on for our health and our well-being and our sense of safety as we move through the world.
I really loved your exploration of that line and appreciated it deeply. Um, I think some of those labels and thoughts of the why am I like this, and some of these sensitivities and those labels have been, like you said, yes, they come with emotions like shame, but they just completely rob us of present moment experiences and just being and being safe in any environment that we're entering into. And that it is such an interesting energy to discern where this behavior is coming from. And the nervous system is so incredible, this malleable, well designed wisdom. And to be able to come into the genius of yourself and like understanding that what might not look the same way for somebody else doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with us. A lot of this is our superpowers. Piper Rose was on recently, and they are so brilliant because they said, you put a bunch of stuff in, mix it all up, and then here I am. This is kind of what you get. And I just love the way they said that, because that was like, yeah, that's just what it is. We're all made up of all these mixed ingredients and all these experiences that we've been through, and there is no normal, and that is the way forward on this podcast. And so I was lit up by that exploration that you just gave us. Thank you so much for that.
Tell us a little bit about from this perspective, as you were exploring neurodivergence at this time in your life and you were going through NSI, what were some of your biggest takeaways from that experience?
So I think for me, getting back into that shame, worthiness, self expression, having this curiosity and new information and knowledge to start to process through, to go through and look at my neurodivergence through an NSI lens was definitely a huge takeaway for me. Getting to dive into all the little nitty gritty of the neurology and how the brain works. I really enjoyed that, and being able to also step back and see that bigger picture. So getting into both the details and the bigger picture allowed me to make some of these new connections in how my brain worked, how my nervous system worked, how the correlations between the complexity of a neurodivergent brain and the way the nervous system responds to that, and our trauma responses to that. I think those were probably the biggest takeaway for me with NSI.
I think there's so much value in everything that you were talking about and the things that you were able to digest during the course. And also just this really powerful reframing. It makes the concept of like n equals one bigger for me. Like it takes this concept in NSI of like everyone's nervous system is unique and different. And we have to work with the nervous system that's in front of us, and really, yeah, it just expands that concept in a really powerful way for me. So I'm really happy to have this conversation. And then I'd love, as you're coming into brain based as a coach, to also just tell us a little bit about like why you want to do this work, who you want to serve, um, what brought you into this space. Because gosh, we're so lucky to have you here.
Yeah, so I've already for a few years now been mixing in a little bit of nervous system work for my high pain, high fatigue Pilates clients and movement clients. Um, but really wanted to take that a step further, was really just, you know, transformed from my work with Rewire coaching and with you, Elizabeth, in that emotional processing, taking it, to a whole nother level, not just pain management, pain free now, right? And I wanted to be able to offer that and have people be able to feel that phenomenon in their own bodies. So I still want to continue working with high pain, chronic pain, hypermobility clients is something I'm also really interested. Ehlers-Danlos clients, because I have this awareness of the joints and how they move, and because I also have to modify a lot of my own drills. I really have to, like you said, N equals one. I have to make these drills my own. And so I approach the drills in a very creative way. And having that sort of knowledge and curiosity to, like, let's problem solve this drill and let's find the way that it works for you, is something that really interests me. But I definitely want to also help fellow neurodivergent folks out there, because I know what it's like to live in a daily, unsafe, high state of needing that regulation, and looking to help them build self acceptance, um, helping them with processing sensory. I come to it with so much gentleness and compassion, because I've had to learn that gentleness and compassion for my own self, knowing that I need a lot of inhibition drills because I can get so overstimulated, and sometimes I need that extra stimulation. And like, so for me, having these clients that have high pain, hypermobility, high fatigue, neurodivergence, like I have this such, I feel like, a well of experience that I really resonate and would love to help and work with other folks like that.
I think that's often what calls us into these spaces. We heal things and then we understand it and then we want to share and give that information away. And it's fantastic because whoever's listening that's resonating with your story, how you teach, they're going to have the link to book with you in the call, a link to the Rewire coaching page. So we're going to be able to put you in contact with Lindsey, and that's really exciting for our community. And it is really such a full circle experience to be here with you today. I'm just delighted and so excited to watch you on your journey. So thank you so much, Lindsey, for your openness, your vulnerability, and everything that you shared with us today.
Yeah, well, thank y'all so much. It was a real pleasure.
Well, honestly, today, Lindsay kind of blew my mind on a few different concepts that I'd been exploring, particularly with the creativity aspect when she started talking about when we got into that line of like complex trauma and neurodivergence, that complex trauma brain. And that really, it offered me a sense of grace today.
Yeah, this topic, among others, is something I'm so interested in exploring right now. And actually, the next season that we have coming up is going to be taking a deep dive into lots of mental health concepts and really looking at our whole mental health paradigm from a neurosomatic intelligence perspective, looking at topics like ADHD and neurodivergence, personality disorders, borderline, bipolar,
Even
all the things, depression.
I was going to say, and even taking it simpler, like depression, anxiety, like not that that's more simple, but it's sort of the baseline before we get into
Some of these
levels.
more um, diagnosed topics. And I think it's going to be a really interesting season. It's one that we're starting to do our research in now. We're going to bring a lot of science, we're going to bring a lot of experts in and have some really powerful conversations, I think, about complex trauma, where that fits into the mental health system, structural trauma, and those components, as well as just the real neurobiology of what's going on.
And we're really trying to be more active on social media, and we would love for you to join our community there. That's how we are learning more about what you want to hear from us, how we can best serve you on this podcast and on this platform. So please give us a follow at trauma.rewired and connect with us there.
Absolutely. We want this to be an active conversation. And your input is really important to us, and that's a great place to connect.
Bye, y'all.